Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. Mike, we and you took a 12-week trip through reading the classic graphic novel, although he hates the term graphic novel, Alan Moore. But we're going to go ahead and just call it a graphic novel anyway. Watchmen. Uh,
Sorry,
the,
Alan.
the entire time, you and I were kind of analyzing this to answer one question of it. Is Watchmen truly the greatest comic book story or graphic novel of all time? Now, obviously, look, tastes vary, right? So we can completely get there's going to be people this doesn't. But for you and I, as comic book fans who read this, we wanted to talk about that this has the reputation of being that. If you read Watchmen on the back, there is always all of these accolades that you see: Eisner Award winner, Hugo Award
Oh,
winner, Time Magazine, all that.
I have a great personal anecdote about this that just happened today out of the blue
Okay.
that lets you know how pervasive and how seeped in our culture this novel is. So I was at the music lesson with my son Jackson, and his music teacher knows nothing about comics. And we
Mm-hmm.
were telling him how, I'm going to be at Comic-Con this weekend. And so he goes, "Oh, you're into comic books." He goes, "I've never really read comics, but several years ago, a friend of mine told me to read The Watchmen."
Yeah.
And so here's the music teacher, never reads comics,
And
but
that's
he
the one that
read
was,
Watchmen. He's like, "I found it very interesting." And so, yeah, if it's made the rounds that far deep that, it's something special, and it truly is.
no, it gets the reputation of being that. So I'll kind of just, we'll talk about some of the plot points and things that maybe make it that, but I'll just kind of ask it from the top, Mike. You've been reading comics, well, over 40 years at this point.
Hmm.
Um,
Long time.
is Watchmen, in your opinion, the greatest comic book story, graphic novel, or however you want to phrase it? Is it the greatest of all time, in your opinion?
I think I think so, just because more makes you really think more. And he brings you back. He brings more to his comics than as his name would imply. And he makes you think more. Although I'm extremely partial also to Darwin Cook's New Frontier, which we may get into in other videos, just because of the love of the characters. But for what Moore did, the deconstruction that he did, the way he did it, the story he told, and of course the great art by Dave Gibbons and the coloring of it, it is a modern masterpiece. And I like that, and no offense to modern comics, but I
Mm-hmm.
like that, this came out in the 80s and it has its dated look. But to me, that just gives it an extra veneer of panache, whatever you want to say,
Most
because I'm a
timeless kind of thing,
classic
yeah.
comic reader. So yes, Moore makes you think, and his stories always make you think, and they challenge you. And he's just he's we a giant among us.
Yeah, no, it's weird in that. Like the first thing that came to mind with this is I think there's a difference between the greatest and your favorite. And so what's
Yeah,
interesting is like if you ask me what my favorite movie of all time is, it's Top Gun. Now,
yeah,
Top Gun is not the greatest movie ever made. It's cheesy, it's predictable,
you're right.
it's got all kinds of ridiculous elements in it. But it is my favorite movie to watch because it's a fun 2 hour time period with quotable stuff and fun scenes and good music. There's other stuff that's like, a movie like A Beautiful Mind, which is that Russell Crowe film about the guy who's got schizophrenia, where it's like, that may be one of the greatest movies of all time. But it's not necessarily fun. Even though the acting in that, the cinematography in that, the performances, the way that it's done is a greater movie than Top Gun. I don't ever sit down on a Sunday and be like, let's watch A Beautiful Mind. Whereas
Right.
Top Gun, it's like, hey man, let me throw that in. And so I think Watchmen is the greatest graphic novel of all time, the greatest comic story of all time. Doesn't mean it's my favorite. Doesn't mean it's the most enjoyable. But what I think what you touched to on this is the use of this medium, the way that he used comic books and the storytelling devices that he did that probably would not have worked in any other medium the way that it did. And that combination, you've always simply stated this: words and pictures, right? Words and pictures
Yeah.
together. the interesting that this is the optimization of that, where you did not have to compromise the seriousness of the storytelling at all, and you utilize this form of comic books to enhance the story completely. And what's interesting is I think Watchmen would have been a good novel, but it wouldn't have been great. The visualization that you get from Gibbons, and not to mention Higgins, the colorist in this, and the way they do things, it is this medium working perfectly together. It is optimizing the story. It enhances everything that you get in a way that, like, look, my favorite book of all time is The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo, you could make a good graphic novel adaptation of it, but I don't think it adds anything to it. I don't think
Right.
that Watchmen is this weird thing that exists where the story is almost great enough to be a graphic novel, but the Gibbons art and the way the medium of comic books so perfectly put everything together, it's hard to find a better executed story than that. I think the other part, Mike, and this is something you and I have talked about quite a bit, is there is a cyclical nature of comic books that we get in that Batman will stop the Joker, Batman will put the Joker in prison, and 3 issues later, because sales demand it, the Joker will break out of Arkham Asylum, and we
Right.
will be back on the treadmill. What I do think, do you think it enhances Watchmen that it is condensed into 12 issues where we get definitive start point, definitive end point of this? Does that enhance the story for you in a way that maybe other comic might struggle with?
It does. It totally does. And the best analogy I can give you for that is the trope of a lot of foreign films to end with and let you think about what came next.
Hmm.
That was always important because, Misty and I will often discuss films and it lets you think and discuss. And we have been discussing this story for 40 years now as a civilization that since it dropped, we have been discussing this in pop culture because it is so well done and it doesn't spoon feed you the ending, although you can kind of see what's going to happen,
It
but it
leaves it
doesn't have
open
to
ended
show it
enough.
and tell it. And that's, in direct correlation and proportion to the artistry that created this work, which is number one, the storytelling of Alan Moore and the art of Dave Gibbons, and of course the colorist Higgins, who did such an amazing job putting this together. But the fact that it lets you think, and that's what Moore does. He makes you think. And the way he ended, I thought it was beautiful. The way he did it, it lets you think like, well, maybe something will happen to Vite, and it's, everything's going to come out. And
Hmm.
what happened to Lori and Dan? I guess they're going to be adventuring, as they called it,
Yep.
all over again, and that's a beautiful thing. It lets you imagine that, and it doesn't spoon feed you. And comics are a medium that tend to do that to
The
their
spoon feed you
readership.
the ending. Yep.
It's kind of designed to do that because it does have the luxury of giving you imagery along with the prose. So, anyway, that's what I
No,
think of.
I think you make an excellent point in that open ended ending. What he did such a good job at is like the paper that has Rorschach's journal, right? There's such doubt raised to the legitimacy of this new frontiersman that gets it that if you want to, you can imagine, well, that's just a kooky newspaper. No one would believe that any more than the other. And I think he does a
Right.
great job. And there's literally in the paper, in the book, in one of those, prose things you get at the end, there is a section of the New Frontiersman where it shows the crazy and kooky. It's kind of the National Enquirer sort of thing in terms of
Right.
if you want to imagine that Vite's plan doesn't get undone, yeah, that public store they publish Rorschach's journal. No one believes it's real, and it's no more real than when we see alligators living in the sewers on the National Enquirer magazine, right?
Right.
If you're trying to think, hey, no, that Rorschach still wins and exposes them, his journal tells the truth. Like you have all these different things that could come into play there, where it depends on your perspective, and you can kind of see what you want. But what is cool is it doesn't compromise. You do get an ending to this story. And I think that's the cool thing is Moore somehow managed to, if you just wanted a concise narrative, he gave it to you. but you also get that tease of more, that tease of what it could be. And I think that's a brilliant thing that we don't see employed enough. And sometimes I feel like we'll read stuff where they're trying to do what Watchmen does. And it's like, no, you didn't actually finish the story. You didn't leave breadcrumbs for I can imagine what goes next. You just didn't complete the story. And he did such a good job of that here, where it's like, wow, that really resonates. I think the other part that where I would say this goes there, I think you can have a bunch of different perspectives on Watchmen and not really be wrong on it. In that, one of the great things he debates in that last issue, I think most of us probably side with the Rorschach thing of no compromise. But I wouldn't look at anybody who goes, but is Rorschach right because he's just going to undo peace because he can't let that go? It's an interesting debate. It's an interesting debate in that, while I think everyone would say what Veidt did is monstrous and awful, does Rorschach's solution actually fix anything? And are they wrong for going, we can't stop what he did? It's an interesting debate. And again, I would side more with the Rorschach side of evil must be punished kind of thing. But it is something where it's a debate there of there are no easy answers. And that, like, let's say Rorschach's plan comes to fruition, now everybody's back at war, millions of people are dead, and whatever piece is there is now even more suspicious than it was before. It's a fantastically written sort of quandary that he puts the characters in, where you, even as a reader, I think, can have an internal debate about what is the right course of action.
That's the beauty of it, right? And like I said, we've been talking about it for 40 years ever since. The conversation kept going, and I'm sure there's a part of Alan Moore who enjoys that, knowing that we are thinking that way. He's somewhat of a little trickster. He likes to insert his little things, and that's who he is. I mean, that's why we got what we got.
Yep. Kind of closing out, just talking about what stood out to us the most. So, most important thing in most stories is character. Mike, what's always interesting to me is when I've read this book, every time I gravitate towards a different character. And I think that's the strength of the writing. And that, like, when I read Justice League, there's no doubt every story I'm mainly interested in the Batman angle of things. You, I think, are very similar with the Flash. What's interesting with Watchmen is the character that I care most about in the story has always fluctuated with me reading it, and that I guess it kind of changes with age. For you reading this, who's the standout character to you in this? Like, if you had to pick one, is there one character that stands out to you more, or do you think it's just such a well written ensemble it's impossible to gravitate towards one?
Okay, I went the first reading. I wanted I was more interested in the Dan story.
Okay.
Dan was my character. There was a time when I read through it where I was more interested in the quandary of the comedian,
Hmm.
and who he was. This time around, I really was drawn. This time around, I was drawn to the pirate story, the shipwrecked man, and I really got into that a lot deeper than I had in other readings. But overall, for like an actual character in the plot, this time I kind of sided with Laurie through most of the story.
Okay. No, what's interesting is when I first read this, Rorschach was I didn't like him, but he was the most interesting character and the
Yeah.
character that I most looked in. And
Same
I
thing
think
with me and the comedian. I didn't like him, and he's only there for the first part of the book, and
tidbits
then
of it, yeah.
but then you keep wondering, and then you go back because he did kind of he was the thing that sparked
He's the
everything.
flashpoint that creates a lot of
Yeah.
this plot with his actions. Um, no,
I
it's
remember
Rorschach
I
was the
remember
most
reading it
interesting
after
one
I
to
saw
me.
the movie.
Yeah.
And his character is really strong in the movie. So I remember going back and reading it again and trying to see things more from the comedian's perspective, which is disastrous. He's like despicable.
No, it's interesting in that, yeah, I always, Rorschach was the character captured the most. And then I think the second or third time I read it, I was like, Dr. Manhattan's probably the best character in the book. This reading, what's interesting, probably just me getting older. Night Owl. Dan is the character I most kind of connected with in this one this time, and that like that sense of the I think as you get older, you kind of understand his perspective a little bit more on things. And you see what I love that he did is, in most comic books, Dan returning to Night Owl would be this victorious thing, the way we see Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight Returns come
Yeah.
back. And,
Yeah.
you see movies like Top Gun right now, or like Top Gun Maverick, where it's I am Maverick's back in the saddle kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is there is some cool things to Dan becoming Night Owl again. He does find his purpose. But what more balanced so well is there's also the destructive element of that Dan, you see why he buttoned himself up for all of those years. He
Yeah.
was trying to stop some of those worst impulses. It's just such a fantastically written character thing, and that I think you can read this. I wouldn't be surprised if we handed this to 10 people and they all walked away with a different favorite character, or maybe not a character you loved, but a character where you attach most to their story. And I think that's a semblance of great writing. I think that's as we get close with the movie coming out and all that, that's what Kirby and Stan did so well with Fantastic Four, where you could read that and you could completely have fans of just Ben reading it, or just Johnny, or just Sue, or just Reed. And
Yeah.
so I think it's such a great ensemble piece. Last part we'll talk into. You and I did a video on this about 2 years ago, and I'll link it in the channel. Watchmen often gets there are its critics too, of course, like anything. And there are people who say that Watchmen was actually one of the worst things to ever happen to the comic book industry. When you reread this, obviously, I think we and you both agree it's probably the greatest story of all time. Does its legacy bug you about the book? How do you view it in the spectrum of what it was and its impact on comics overall?
I don't like that people tried to emulate it and move the whole medium to the dark side. I
Mhm.
think, and I don't think Moore appreciated it either. Um, but anyway, I feel that, because it was, lightning in a bottle, that the publishers and the artists as well, and the writers really tried to move that forward. Oh, if that's what you like, we can give you more of that.
We can do more of that.
And so there's a dark side to it that just really came down the pike, and especially in the last, 20, 30 years. You're not going to really match it. And you shouldn't really. This is a story that, is supposed to remain outside of the
The
medium.
main
It's an
comic universe.
Elseworld. It's one of those Elseworld stories.
Yeah, we
It's
would identify it as
completely
Elseworlds.
Alan Moore's baby, and it needs to lay out there. It's kind of like when they try and do in continuity now, they try and bring something that worked as an Elseworld story, they try to bring it into the main continuity, and it
It's a
always
little
is
bit like what they've done with like Miles Morales, where the Ultimate Universe and things. Where it's like it's not that it's awful, it's not that it can't be done, but it does feel weird integrating. And Watchmen's a more stark difference than that, certainly. What's
What
interesting is
did
I
you think?
kind of hate Watchmen because I always associated Watchmen's story with what happened to comics, and I hated that overall. But the weirdest thing for me is reading it this time. It kind of reminded me, and this is probably a little off in terms of the analogy, but it's kind of like trying to blame The Dark Knight for the failure of the DCEU. And that The Dark Knight was a very dark, serious, grounded movie. It hit with audiences, and DC's mistake was DC went, man, people love dark, gritty, and grounded. Let's do that for Superman. Let's do that for our characters. And it didn't work because it was never supposed to. And that you
Yeah,
can't blame The Dark Knight for that. The Dark Knight made a great movie for what it was doing, for what it was supposed to be, and for the characters that inhabited its world. To blame The Dark Knight for Zack Snyder deciding, hey, people like dark, gritted, groundy Batman, let's do that with Superman, that's Zack Snyder's fault, and that's DC's fault, and the DCEU go into that dark, depressing, morose thing that kind of eventually killed it. Yeah, you could contribute some to WB going, hey, the Dark Knight was successful. Let's do this with all our characters. But it doesn't really blame the Dark Knight itself. And that's the thing is, Watchmen absolutely had an impact that I think superseded anything Alan Moore ever intended, superseded anything that its fans probably intended. I don't think anybody reading Watchmen when it came out went, man, this would be great to see more of this in the pages of Justice League and the Avengers and Batman.
no
And
way.
to blame Watchmen for that, or to blame Moore for that, to me kind of is a bad faith argument, and that he never himself, if he wanted Watchmen to be the tone, he'd have used the Flash. He'd have used Batman. He'd have used Superman. We know he tried to use the Charlton characters, but he never tried to use the Justice League. It
No,
seemed like even he knew with the story that he was telling, hey man, this isn't where Batman belongs. This isn't where Superman belongs. And
no.
what's interesting is you and I'll kind of talk more about some of this stuff as we go later on the channel. Doomsday Clock, when you read it, there also often seems to be kind of a condemnation from Jeff Johns a little bit, despite the fact that those two are intermingled, of John's kind of showing like, no, the Watchmen universe never really belonged with DC. It's a really fascinating thing to see its legacy and how it holds up. But would be curious, what do you guys think down below? Do you think Watchmen is the greatest graphic novel of all time, the greatest comic book story of all time? However you want to phrase it. I kind of like using graphic novel just because it would make Alan more upset. And he hates everything about comics anyway. But
Yeah.
would be just interested. What do you guys think down below? If you watched all 12 episodes with us, though, still hope you enjoyed those. Mike and I will have next week. We will start with The New Frontier. That's the next one we're going to tackle. A much different and starkly contrasted type
Right.
of novel, but that's the next one we're going to dive into from the works of the great Darwin Cook. So if you are interested, join us for that as well. Over the next 6 weeks, I believe, we will dive through that one issue at a time as well. As always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. God bless you all. You have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.